I had not spoken in 9 years when she walked into my study and broke the silence without trying. I want to be precise about this. She was not trying. She had a satchel of dried thorn root over one shoulder and a folded list of dosage instructions in her left hand. And she was explaining, in the direct voice of someone who has repeated this information many times to people who needed it, that the root needed to be steeped in cold water first, not hot, because heat destroyed the compound that mattered, and that 3 days of dosing was insufficient regardless of apparent recovery. And that the most common error was stopping treatment the moment the patient felt better rather than completing the course. She was talking about fever root. She was not talking to me specifically. She was talking to the room, the way one talks when one is delivering information that must be delivered correctly, and the identity of the recipient is less important than the accuracy of the delivery. And then the silence broke. 9 years. 112 attempts by women the pack brought before me, healers, moon-blessed candidates, high-ranked omegas, a visiting Luna from the Western Territory who had broken 3 other curses and was entirely confident about this one. None of them had moved it. The silence had become, over those 9 years, less like a wound and more like a fact of my existence, a wall I had learned to govern from behind, turning absence into authority, turning the thing I had lost into the thing I led with. And a border herbalist from a village so peripheral, it wasn't in the formal census, came in from the snow with a satchel of root medicine, and broke it by telling me about steeping temperatures. This is the story of Thornhill, and of Lena, and of 9 years of silence that ended on a Tuesday in the deep of winter, when I finally understood what the curse had been waiting for. The curse was laid in the 31st year of my reign, by a rival alpha named Drevhin, who was dying of a wound he had taken in a territorial dispute that had gone badly for him. Dying men say things. Drevhin said, "Let the alpha king of Thornhill be silent until his true mate's voice finds him, and if she never does, let him be silent until the ground takes him." Then he died, which should have made the curse moot. But curses laid by dying men in earnest are not moot. They are, as my pack's lore-keeper Edna explained to me in very careful written notes 3 days after Drevhin's death, among the most stubborn varieties, because the dying put everything remaining into them. So I was silent. At first the silence was a crisis. I was an alpha king. I governed by presence and voice. The pack structure was built on the alpha's word as law, spoken and heard, a living connection between the one who led and the ones who followed. A king without a voice was not, historically, something Thornhill had needed a protocol for. We built one. Perrin, my first elder, became my interpreter, reading my written notes aloud to the council, relaying my decisions in formal sessions, translating my responses to visiting representatives from other territories. The pack adapted with the loyalty that Thornhill's pack has always shown, which is the loyalty of people who have decided their king is worth the inconvenience. I adapted too. I became more precise in writing than I had ever been in speech, because when you cannot speak, every word you commit to paper is the only word you have, and waste is not an option. The mate bond aspect of the curse became clear within the first year when the pack's moon-blessed healer Vea attempted the restoration and nothing happened. She was a healer of considerable power. Her failure established that this was not a problem of spiritual authority or ceremonial correctness. It was a problem of identity. Only one specific person could break it. The question was who? The pack, with the devotion that I have always found both moving and occasionally exhausting, began finding her. For 9 years, they brought me women. I want to be fair to this process. It was undertaken with genuine care, genuine research, genuine hope. Perrin maintained a registry. Edna consulted the lore texts. The women who came were not random. They were considered, selected, invited respectfully, informed of the situation, and asked if they would speak before me in the hope that theirs was the voice the curse named. None of them were pressured. Many of them were simply hopeful. A few of them, frankly, seemed to find the situation romantic, which I had no objection to, but which the curse appeared entirely unmoved by. 112 women, 9 years, none of them broke it. By the 9th year, I had stopped expecting it. This is not despair. I had governed Thornhill for 9 silent years with what I believed was competence, and the pack had not suffered for my silence beyond the initial adjustment period. The mate bond, the voice, the particular warmth that the lore described as the mark activating. I had concluded these were things that might not happen for me, and I had made my peace with that conclusion in the way of men who have decided that what they have is enough to work with. I was wrong about this. I am recording that clearly. The morning Lena arrived. It had been snowing for 3 days. The winter illness had come down from the northern ridges earlier than usual, the kind of dense bone-cold fever that comes every several years and takes the very old and the very young if it isn't treated quickly. My court healer Tomas had sent urgent word to every village apothecary and herbalist in the territory. We needed thornroot, large quantities, immediately, the kind that had been stockpiled by the careful and the prepared. Most of the responses came back with apologies in small quantities. The border villages were the last to respond, which was typical. The couriers took 2 days each way in snow, but when the response came from the outermost village, Crestwatch, it was different from the others. The message said, "I have 40 pounds of dried thornroot, properly harvested and stored. I will bring it myself because I need to explain the dosage to whoever will be administering it, as the instructions being followed in the capital are incorrect, and people will recover more slowly than necessary if not corrected. Please have someone meet me at the East Gate. L." No title, no formal address, no deference clause, simply, "I will bring it myself and your instructions are wrong, please arrange logistics." Perrin showed me the message with the expression he uses when something has surprised him pleasantly. I wrote, "Send someone to meet her at the East Gate and bring her to the medical supply room." What happened instead was that the gate guard, a young man named Tolan who has since received thorough, additional training in guest management, brought her directly to my study on the grounds that she was asking to speak to whoever was in charge, and he had interpreted this literally. She came in from the cold with snow on her cloak and her satchel already open, pulling out bundles of carefully wrapped root as she crossed the threshold, talking before she had fully assessed the room. "The cold steep method is essential," she was saying, to the room in general, having apparently decided that whoever needed to hear this was present. 3 hours minimum in cold water before any heat is applied. I've been told the capital healers are hot steeping from the start, which is faster but destroys the etheric compound. That's the part that actually breaks the fever at the source, rather than just reducing the surface temperature. Hot steeped thornroot will make a patient feel better faster, but they'll relapse in 4 days. You need cold steep for a genuine recovery. She set a bundle of root on my desk. Then she looked up and saw me. There was a brief recalibration. She took in the desk, the written documents, the silver Thornhill crest on the wall, the Alpha's chair in which I was sitting, and arrived at a conclusion. "Oh," she said, "I'm in the wrong room." I picked up my writing board and wrote, "You are in the right room. Continue." She read this, looked at me, looked at the board. "You're the Alpha King," she said. I wrote, "Yes, continue about the steeping." Another brief recalibration. She had, I could see, heard of the silence. The pack's situation was not a secret, but she had apparently not connected it to the person she was about to deliver thornroot dosage instructions to, and she was now doing the connecting in real time. "The cold steep," she said, returning to her bundles with the pragmatism of someone who has decided that the information needs to be delivered regardless of the circumstances. 3 hours in cold water, then bring to heat slowly, not boiling, just steaming. The compound becomes active somewhere between warm and hot, which is why the temperature matters. She pulled out her folded instruction list. Set it on the desk beside the root. I've written it out, she said. But I've learned that written instructions get simplified in the middle of a crisis, and the simplification is always the part that matters most. The cold steep is the part that gets skipped because it takes time, and when people are sick, the instinct is to do things faster. I was writing a response, something about distributing her written instructions to the healing staff, when the silence moved. I do not have a better word for it. After 9 years, the silence was something I felt as a presence, a weight at the base of my throat, a door that had been sealed. And now it moved, not breaking, not yet, but shifting, the way ice shifts in a river in late winter, the deep structural adjustment that precedes the break. The mate mark on my wrist, which had been entirely quiescent for 9 years because I had long since stopped attending to it, became warm. I stopped writing. Lena was still talking, moving to a second bundle of root. This batch is from the eastern slope, which gets more sun in autumn. The compound concentration is slightly higher, so reduce the steep time to 2.5 hours or it becomes bitter, which patients resist, and resistance to medicine when you're sick is. The warmth reached my chest. I looked at her. She was examining the root bundle with the focus of someone for whom the quality of the material is genuinely interesting, turning it in her calloused hands with the attention of a woman who has grown and processed this plant many times and knows what good harvesting looks like. There was snow still melting at the hem of her cloak. Her hair was pinned back in the practical way of someone who has not given it much thought because there are more pressing things. She smelled of pine resin and dried herbs and the cold outdoor air. She had not looked at me once in a way that was about me. Every glance had been in service of the information she was delivering. This was, I recognized it, with the sudden clarity of something understood only in the moment of encountering it. The first time in 9 years that anyone had spoken to me as if the silence were simply a logistical fact to work around rather than a condition to perform responses to. 112 women had spoken before me with the weight of attempting something. Lena was speaking before me with the weight of making sure I understood about cold steeping temperatures. So the eastern slope batch needs to be labeled separately, she was finishing. I've marked the bundles with a red thread. Red thread 2.5 hours. No red thread 3 hours. She looked up, and I said her name. This requires some accounting for. I did not know her name. I had not been told it. The gate guard's report had said only, Border Herbalist, Crestwatch Village, Satchel of Root. And yet when the silence broke, when it opened, cleanly and entirely, the door swinging wide after 9 years on a hinge that had never moved, the first thing that came out of my throat was not a word I chose. It was a word that arrived, the way the mate mark's warmth had arrived, the way the bond arrives, not decided but recognized. The word was Lena. She went very still. The room went very still. Through the open study door, which Tolan, the gate guard, had not closed behind them because he had not been trained in the protocol of closed doors in the Alpha study, my first elder parent, who had followed at a careful distance, heard the sound, the word, the voice he had not heard in 9 years. Lena was looking at me with the expression of someone recalibrating everything about their morning at high speed. That's my name, she said carefully. I looked at my own wrist. The mate mark was visible, fully, immediately visible, silver white and warm, not the faint preliminary glow but the complete mark of a bond that had been waiting for exactly this. I turned my wrist and showed it to her. She looked at it, then at her own wrist, where the same mark was burning into view on her skin. A mirror, silver white, the bond's confirmation in the language that needed no speech and no ceremony. The curse, she said. It was not a question. She knew the story. Everyone in Thornhill's territory knew the story. Yes, I said. My voice was rough from 9 years of disuse. It sounded strange to me, lower than I remembered, slower, as if the machinery of it had to be reminded how to work. But it worked. The word came out whole. I wasn't trying to break it, she said. I know, I said, 2 words. They came more easily than the first. That's why it broke. Through the door, I could hear Perrin making a sound. Not a word. Something more fundamental than a word. The sound a man makes when something he has been hoping for across 9 years of careful, faithful service arrives without warning on a Tuesday in the snow. Lena looked at the mark on her wrist for a long moment. Then, with the pragmatism she apparently brought to everything, she looked at the root bundles on my desk. "The cold steep," she said. "You'll make sure they know." "I will make sure they know," I said, 3 words this time. 4, then 3. The voice was finding itself. "Good," she said. And then, with the expression of someone arriving at a question she has been holding back, "How long has it been?" 9 years, I said. She looked at me steadily, and the first word was my name. "Yes." "You didn't know my name?" "No." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the mark on her wrist, at the warmth of it in the cold air of the study. Then she looked at me, and the recalibration was still happening behind her eyes, the practical mind catching up to the extraordinary fact. But underneath it something had gone quiet in a way that was not the silence of the curse. It was the silence of someone who has understood something large, and is giving it the space it deserves. "The cold steep instructions," she said finally. "The written ones on the desk. Can you—" She stopped, started again. "Would you read them to the healer who distributes the medicine, so there's a voice attached to the instructions? People remember better when there's a voice." I looked at her. "Yes," I said, "I can do that." And I did. I read her instructions aloud to Tomas, my court healer, who stood in the doorway of my study, and listened to his Alpha King's voice for the first time in 9 years, with the expression of a man who is working very hard to maintain professional composure. The pack council, which had assembled in the corridor because news travels in a hold the way water travels downhill, quickly and without announcement, stood in the passage and listened. Perrin, who had served me through 9 years of silence with a faithfulness that I have never fully found the words to honor, listened with his hands folded and his eyes bright with something he would not let become undignified. I read about cold steeping temperatures and steep durations, and the red thread system for the Eastern Slope batch. It was the first speech I had given in 9 years. The formal ceremonies came later, the claiming, the naming, the Luna's documentation that Perrin had ready within hours because he had, it emerged, kept it partially drafted for years in the particular hope of a man who refuses to stop preparing for something he believes will eventually happen. Lena received all of this with the composure of someone who processes large facts by doing the next practical thing. She asked about the distribution schedule for the thorn root. She asked whether the villages had been prioritized by severity or by proximity. She asked whether there was someone coordinating the courier routes, or whether that was being managed ad hoc. I answered all of her questions, with my voice, which still felt on that first day like something slightly borrowed, as if I was speaking through an instrument I hadn't played in years and needed to relearn, note by note, the shape of it. She did not comment on this. She simply listened when I spoke, responded to what I said, and moved on to the next question. This is, I have learned across the 7 winters since, exactly how she is. The extraordinary and the ordinary receive the same quality of attention from her, which means neither is diminished and neither is inflated out of proportion. The thorn root was distributed correctly. The winter illness retreated. No pack member was lost to it. Lena's cold steep method was adopted as the formal protocol for Thornhill's medical archive. Edna, the lorekeeper, spent a full moon cycle in a state of professional excitement about the curse's resolution, producing a 30-page analysis of why Lena's voice had succeeded where 112 others had not. Her central argument being that the curse's language, true mate's voice, had meant not simply the voice of the one destined for the bond, but the voice speaking without intent to claim, without awareness of what it was doing, simply the voice being itself. Every woman who had come before had been trying. Lena had been explaining steep temperatures. The curse had recognized the difference. Edna's analysis is in the Thornhill archive. Lena read it, agreed with the central argument, and added a margin note that said, "Also, the cold steep is genuinely important, and I want the record to reflect that the medical instructions were correct." The margin note is also in the archive. 7 winters now. My voice has become again what it was before the silence, the particular voice of someone who governs, which is not the loudest voice in a room, but the one the room orients toward. I have spent 7 years relearning what I had before and discovering that some of what I had before was not worth recovering. I was, before the curse, quicker to speak and slower to listen, and the silence, whatever it cost me, taught me the difference. Lena runs the border medical network now. She didn't plan to. She simply kept identifying gaps and filling them, the way she fills every gap she finds, until the informal work became formal work, and the formal work became a structure that covers every peripheral village in Thornhill's territory, the ones that were never in the census, the ones like Crestwatch that had always been too far from the center to be counted. She is in the archive room this morning, annotating the new season's herb yield records, which she does with the same focused attention she brought to the thornroot bundles on my desk on that first Tuesday. She paused when I came in, looked up, and said something about the eastern slope yield being lower this year and whether I had any intelligence on the autumn rainfall patterns in that section of territory. I told her what I knew about the rainfall. She made a note. Then she looked at me across the archive table with the quiet expression that is specific to her, not the small private smile that belongs to other moments, but the steady look of someone who is entirely present and finds the present entirely sufficient, and said, "You're watching me work again." "Yes," I said. "You do that?" "I do," I said. "I spent 9 years in silence. I am not going to waste the use of a voice now that I have it back." "You could use it for something other than watching me annotate yield records," she said. "I could," I agreed. "But this is what's happening right now, and I have found that what's happening right now is generally worth attending to." She made another note. The archive room was warm with the fire in the iron grate. Outside, the early winter light came through the high windows and fell across the record shelves, across her dark hair, across the mate mark on her wrist that was always visible when she worked. She never covered it, the same way she never performed anything she didn't have. I had been silent for 9 years, and the silence had cost me more than I admitted to myself or to the pack. But I would not trade the silence for a different path, because the different path does not end in this archive room on a winter morning, with Lena annotating yield records and the fire warm and my voice, which she gave back to me by speaking about steeping temperatures without once thinking about what she was doing, available to say exactly this. "You are the best thing that has happened to Thornhill in 9 years, and the cold steep instructions were correct." She looked up, the quiet expression again. "Was that difficult to say?" "The first part," I said. "The second part I have said many times. It is in the archive." "It is," she agreed. She returned to her records. I stayed in the archive room. There was nowhere else I needed to be.